Welcome to Instant Deck Techs. The aim of this series is to give you a short, concise guide on how to build a certain deck. It won't cover every card, but we'll go through all the categories and go over the types of cards needed to make the deck work. Any card mentioned will be down in the description below. The commander of this deck is Archelos Lagoon Mystic. It is 1 black, green, blue for a 2/4 legendary creature, Turtle Shaman. It has the ability, as long as Archelos Lagoon Mystic is tapped, other permanents enter the battlefield tapped. As long as Archelos is untapped, other permanents enter the battlefield untapped. We're going to be building this deck to take advantage of Archelos' ability to bring lands into play untapped. As we're in Sultai, this is going to be a graveyard-centric deck. We will also be having some ways to take advantage of tapping Archelos to help us control the board. This deck will get a lot of use out of utility lands, so we will mention these in the other sections of the deck, as well as in its own section at the end. The first part of the deck involves getting as many lands into our graveyard as possible. We want to run a large section of cards to do this. In a deck like this, self-mill will also be a form of card draw. Look for cards that mill, but also have an extra ability. Perpetual Timepiece is always good in any self-mill deck, as the added protection is very important when it comes up. Effects that offer single-use self-mill should also be considered. Look for them to be either very cheap, or to draw us cards while we are self-milling. Tamiyo, Collector of Tales, and Liliana's Majesty both self-mill, as well as bring something back from the graveyard to either our hand or to the battlefield. These type of effects are especially useful, as sometimes we will mill something we don't want to. As this is me, I would also play a selection of cards with Dredge. I love these cards, so would play them all, but generally speaking I would recommend at least running Dakmor Salvage and Life from the Loam, as they both allow us to get lands back from the graveyard. There are also lands that by themselves can go to the graveyard. I'm a big fan of lands that cycle in this deck, as they put themselves into the graveyard while smoothing out our draws, and with Archelos out, they don't even come into play tapped. These three are probably the best of the cycling lands in the deck, as they help fix our mana. The Onslaught and Urza's Saga cycling lands are also very good in this deck, as their mana requirements aren't too difficult to activate. The Deserts that cycle are probably the least good of all the cycling lands, but as the effect is still good, I would still want to run them. Another way of getting lands into our graveyard is by sacking them. There are effects which add mana when we sack them, there are lands that sack other lands, and obviously there are fetch lands. Because of the commander, I don't think this is a deck that massively requires fetch lands, but run them if you have them. And with Titania out, we get a beta every time we sack a land, so if you're running this package, it's something to consider. For the ramp in this deck, the best cards will also put lands into our graveyard. These three all do this, so I would recommend running them. For the rest of the mana base, I'll go over the budget options first. Look for creatures that bring lands into play, but then can go into the graveyard themselves, or help further mill our own deck. The alternate way of taking the ramp is by playing effects that let us play multiple lands per turn. These are generally speaking pricier than the previous section, but they will work very well in the deck, as we will be playing some landfall effects as well. The cards that let you play additional lands per turn also work really well with cards that let us play lands from our graveyard. With these out, the lands in our graveyard becomes part of our hand, so we should have no issue playing multiple lands per turn. Life from the Loam also has a place in this category. We won't need anywhere near as much dedicated card draw on this deck, as the self-mill will play a part of this. The cards mentioned below, however, are all worth considering due to their interactions with lands, which should mean we should have some very explosive turns. For interaction, I would look for effects that are on creatures and preferably put themselves into the graveyard. Cards with Echo and Evoke are especially good here. Here is a selection of cards that work while in the graveyard. I'd recommend using these to fill any missing slots in the deck. For cards like Gnaw to the Bone and Spider Spawning, keep in mind the number of creatures that you are running before you include them. You can also run some effects to control how and when Archelos is tapped, so you can take control of the board. If you're not a fan of some of the graveyard style effects in this list, then I would run some more of these. There is a much more stacked orientated version of this deck, which would look to run a lot more of these effects than the graveyard centric build that we have here. Amulet of Vigor also serves as another copy of Archelos in the deck. I personally wouldn't run it in this graveyard build of the deck, but if you're building it to focus on the tap style of effects, I would include it. If you're running the Dredge package, however, I would look at these two cards, as they can help untap Archelos while giving us value from discarding a Dredger. Most of the cards we've gone over up until now have all been the engine that will drive the deck forward. When it comes to winning the game, however, I would look for cards with either powerful landfall type effects or something like Worm Harvest, which will give us value again and again. You can also run Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth and Dread Presence, so Dread Presence triggers off of every land that we play. As most of the lands in this deck will be non-basic, Field of the Dead will be very consistent and will make a whole horde of zombies to swing for the win. If you're running some land tutors, you can also play Thespian Sage and Dark Depths to rush out a 2020 flyer. The cheap land tutors are also good as they put lands into our graveyard. And you can also turn all your lands into creatures, and then hit face with a Kamal out. And with all the mana you'll have, you can also run some huge X spells like Villainous Wealth or Genesis Wave to win the game. The big finish to the deck will normally come in the way of one of these cards. With the pieces already out, if we return all our lands from the graveyard to play with any of these cards, then it should be game over. You can also run effects that get lands out of the deck. As we're not going to be running many basics, I would look for effects that can get any land, like Scapeshift and Reshape the Earth. We're able to run a lot of utility lands in this deck, as Archelos removes a lot of the downside of these, by letting them come into play untapped. One of the best parts of this commander is you can get really greedy and play a lot of lands that do cool things. For mana fixing as well, you can run the best lands you have available to you, with the bonus knowledge that with the commander out, your gates are as good as your dual lands, and your scry lands are even better. This video was a request from a viewer. The next couple of deck techs you will see will also be from requests in the comments. If you have a deck you'd like to see, please let us know. If you like the look of those, please consider subscribing. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.